Some of the celebrations, some of the aspects of celebrations of Bealtaine are bonfires, maypoles again. There are some communities that I'm not sure if they still do this or not. I like this idea personally. They, in a sense, smudge their cattle by herding them through the smoke of bale fires. So they will set bales of hay on fire and then herd the cattle in between them. And actually some people will go through too to receive the same smudging for the season of prosperity, fertility, and so forth. The hill of the fires of Tara in Ireland. I've heard of this. I would love to see it. It's the celebration is referred to as the fires of Tara. At the hill of Tara is where originates from. So basically, at this time and on this particular celebration, all the fires in the area would be doused. All your home fires, fireplaces, whatever, are put out. And then the bonfire is lit at the hill of Tara, and then flames from that bonfire are taken by torch or whatever method, and then the fire is then relit throughout the community in the homes. Cool. It's passed down from home to home to home. So that was an amazing thing. And I remember when my friend Gemma was here a while ago from Ireland, a number of years ago, and she mentioned how when she was coming here, and I believe she was landing first in New York, and the evening, and she was bringing a representation of the fire from Tara with her, because it was right around or just after this time of year. And when she landed in New York was a time that must have been the last time New York had a blackout. So she arrives and it's all dark, and she's bringing the flame of Tara with her. It was the coolest thing. So that's where I first heard about this particular type of celebration. In Rome, the people in Rome honored their household gods, and then there was a festival of flowers in the community, including 3 days. You were talking about 3 days in Latvian celebrations. Mm-hmm. 3 days of apparent unbridled sexual activity.
Oh.
Well, Romans don't mess around. Or they do. Or they do, depending on how you look at it.
Exactly.
Norse celebrations include remembering Ivan Kelve. I probably massacred that name too, but he was a man who was ordered by King Olaf Tryggvason, sorry guys, to be tortured and drowned. The reason being he refused to give up his pagan beliefs. So this is on May 6th that this celebration happens, and then the following week is the festival of the midnight sun, honoring the sun goddess. The Greeks in May celebrated Athena, the Roman equivalent being Minerva, and also Artemis, who I'm, of course, the Roman version is Diana, who is one of my goddesses. And also the Green Man. At this time of year, the Green Man makes an appearance, and the Green Man is basically the spirit of the forest, and he emerges at this time of year. Now, the maypole is, some of you have probably seen this thing. I don't know if you know what it means, though. It actually started out as a fertility representation of the phallic symbol. So it actually is a large pole sticking up out of the ground, and then the ribbons coming off of it. There are ribbons that are tied to the top, and they stream down. And they are meant to represent, if I remember correctly, correct me if I'm wrong, menstruation. So the menstrual cycle. So again, fertility, the male and female coming together. And we've done this once so far at our temple out in the backyard. We do have a maypole that we did put up last year, and we did the dance. So the people who are doing the maypole dance is everyone grabs an end of the ribbon that's attached to the top of the pole, and there's a specific dance that you do where the people, there are basically two circles around the pole, and every other person belongs to a different circle going in the opposite direction. So basically the people doing the dance are dancing around each other, and they're weaving in and out through each other as they pass. So you're weaving, ultimately, if you're doing it right, you're weaving the ribbons around this pole. And as you continue with this, of course, the ribbons are getting lower on the pole and the people are getting closer to the pole because the ribbons are shorter.
Mm.
We managed to accomplish a good deal of this after some practice. It does take a little bit of practice to get the rhythm down and to get this thing smoothly wrapped around there. But it definitely is related to the idea of fertility. And also, Bealtaine is a significant time for the fairy folk to come around. And this one, some of you listening might be going, okay, that's a bit too much. I know there's a lot of things I say that are probably a bit too much, but I will tell you that the fae, as they're referred to, or the fairy folk, my first connection with them is I had heard stories from people in my temple about things happening, like, keys missing. I gotta get to work. Where's my keys? I left them here last night. Now they're not here. Or some people, and this is kind of something I experienced, was sometimes in your lower legs, you might feel like maybe little pokes or little just weird things on your lower legs. And you're like, what's that? What's going on? I'm having a stroke? No. And a lot of people, myself included, will attribute this to the fairy folk, who are basically saying, you're not giving me any attention. So what I was instructed to do, and I did this in my studio apartment that I had a couple of years ago. I had an altar set up there, and near my representation of Earth, which was actually a plant that I grew. It didn't survive after I transplanted it, but it was a blue spruce that I grew from a seed in a potted plant on my altar in the space representing Earth. And what I would do periodically is I had little shot glasses, and I would put one with milk or cream, one with honey, and one with whiskey. And those were gifts for the fairy folk. Now, people who live in non-urban areas would take these outside and leave them outside for the fairy folk. Living in an urban environment, I didn't have that. I was in an apartment building. I didn't have that luxury, but I did have my little plant on my altar, and that's where I did it. And these things would calm down then. So it was really kind of cool. And also, a short time ago, when we had a retreat at a forest preserve out in the western suburbs, it's referred to as Hoover. And we were doing an overnight there. And one of the activities we did in one afternoon/evening is we took a walk through. We were guided by some of the people in my temple who have a special affinity, a special attachment to the earth itself and to the fairy folk. So they took us through, and they were showing us this and that and everything. And we found this one area that we decided was a what's it called? Because you can actually build these and leave them outside for the fairy folk to hang out in. It's like a little, not a home, but like a little home in a yard. And you actually set this up with like little chairs some people put in there and little things like this that are meant for places for the fairy folk to hang out. There's a word for it, and I should have looked this up, and I didn't. I'm sorry, guys. We found a space in the woods that we decided was an actual natural one that fairies hung out in. And as we were looking around this area and looking at the trees and looking at the structure of the branches in one area that we decided could have been a portal of some sort because of the way the branches kind of came together, I looked, and there was this little flying thing. And there's lots of flying things in the woods, right? We all know that. This particular thing was a pale green in color, maybe half an inch long, maybe just a tad more than that. And what seemed to be the body of this creature was vertical, but the wings were horizontal. And I could not look at this thing and not think fairy. I'm looking at a fairy here, a little fairy creature in nature. And it was just an amazing thing. And I said, hey guys, look, there's a fairy here. And it was very cool. So the fairy folk, there you go. And we got, 15 minutes left?
We've got 20.
20. 20. Okay, well, what else do I talk about? Oh, yeah, I could talk about the fact that my first Bealtaine ceremony that I went to was in Ireland. My trip to Ireland. And my friend Gemma that I mentioned earlier when about coming here, I met her there first. Um, at the time, among other things, she was running a bed and breakfast, a family business. And one of our stays for, I think, 2 nights we stayed there because we traveled not all over Ireland, but we traveled a lot. We didn't stay in one place for the entire 9 days we were there because we wanted to see different areas and different regions. But we were in Kells, where Gemma lives, with her husband and her kids. And we stayed at her B&B, which is called White Gables. Very lovely, cute little place. And we were there during the time of Bealtaine. This is also when I met Janet and Gavin, was at this ceremony because they led the ceremony. So we were out in the backyard of the B&B, and we had a bonfire going. And we had a large circle. There were a bunch of people there. And 2 of my temple mates that were traveling with me, husband and wife, were chosen to be representative in the ceremony of fertility and all this kind of thing. Pardon me. And I'll never forget this. This was my introduction to my friend Emma, too. I've not seen her since I was there, but we're friends on Facebook. And she was standing next to me in the circle. I don't think I've ever told you this story. And I'm just marveling at all this, and I'm marveling at the directions being called. And I've never forgotten this, and I try to emulate this when I call directions, because Gemma was calling air, I think. And she did it in such a way where there was just utter abandon. I mean, I think her arms were out even, and it wasn't this quiet, humble little voice. She was calling to the air and to the winds to blow, and it was this beautiful, beautiful thing. And I try to keep that in mind if I'm calling directions, especially if we're outside doing a circle. And the circle starts, and Janet was asking if there were any virgins in the circle. Yeah. And so this was meant to be a private joke. I leaned over to Emma and I said, if it's been long enough, does it count? And she chuckled and she said, I don't know. And then she turned into the circle and she went, Janet, this is my new friend Rob, and he's wondering if it's been long enough, does that count? And I just kind of looked at her and I said, thanks, Emma. Nice to meet you. And Janet's response, as I recall, is potentially in some ways, but for our purposes this evening, I'm sorry, no. So that was my introduction to Emma Fitzsimmons in Kells, Ireland, yes. But again, it was also my intro to Janet and Gavin, who I cherish knowing them, and I cherish that we call each other friend, and Gemma as well, with her husband Donna, and now they have 2 kids. Her second baby was just born 2 weeks ago. Aww. Her daughter. So yeah, that was a very, very cool event. One that I will never forget. Now, I'm going to start wrapping up here, and there's part of my wrap up that might catch a few people off guard. I hope not. It kind of harkens back to earlier in this show when we were talking about DVDs of films that tend to celebrate this time of year on the Christian calendar. It is a film version of the story of the person of Jesus as I understand him, that I fell in love with the first time I saw it, and I still have it in my collection of DVDs at home. There are other versions that I have seen during my life that I appreciate. And it's funny because I was talking about Godspell. Sylvia mentioned it earlier. I was talking about Godspell with a theater friend of mine just 2 days ago. I was working with her. We were talking about this. And I was sharing with her that the movie I grew up watching, the film version. Mm-hmm. And I love that. Victor Garber. I was introduced to Victor Garber in this film. And listening to the songs and the soundtrack and everything, I grew up with this thing. But it wasn't until I began to see it on stage that it had an emotional impact. And I think part of it is seeing